Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to lesson 3 of week 7. This is lecture 20 of the NPTEL MOOCs course on economic growth and development. In this week, we are discussing the human development indices. In the first 2 lessons of this week, we started with the significance of what is the human development index, and we looked at the various components of the human development index. So what we know as of now is it is a composite index composed of a number of indicators, primarily 3 dimensions, 3 important dimensions of human life: education, health and income, or standards of living, or command over resources. And following the human development index, we also looked at a few illustrations of how the human development index is calculated. And in the last class, we also got introduced to a few other indices apart from the human development index, which is regularly reported through the human development reports of the UNDP, or the United Nations Development Programme. In today's class, we will look at those other associated human development indices which are also calculated along with the HDI. And it is important that we look at these indices also because there are various aspects of human life which are calculated, which are estimated and then put in the form of a composite index in all of these indices, which helps country comparisons and also for policy making. So let us begin with these other associated indices. One of the first index that we will be discussing in today's class is the Gender Development Index. The Gender Development Index, as you saw in the last class, was introduced in 1995, and since then the Gender Development Index is being calculated, is being estimated regularly since 1995. And through the Gender Development Index, the lens through which we look at development policy and making of development policy has changed, because that was one of the first steps which was taken towards making development policies gender be looked at through a gender lens. Till the coming in of these gender related development indices, one of the limitations of development policies, whether at the national levels or at the international levels, is that they were gender neutral. For example, many of you must have heard of development policies such as gender based budgeting, or looking at various financial policies after addressing gender concerns. So most of the beginning of these the concerns, gender concerns being addressed, can be traced to the coming in of the gender development indices through the UN HDRs, which shifted the attention of policymakers towards the fact that women and girls continue to be more deprived than their male counterparts in both the developing and the developed countries. So let us begin with today's class with the Gender Development Index and also an introduction to the Gender Development Index. We know now that by 1990, apart from the HDI, the separate Human Development Index were also calculated for male and females, or men and women. So the HDR of 1990, even though it did not come up with the index which is now known as the Gender Development Index, HDI was calculated separately for men and women, but there was one serious limitation in that calculation, and that was the limitation of the income indicator. Because separate incomes for men and women were not available, the average income that was available was taken as a proxy for calculation of HDI for both men and women. So as is being shown on your slide, income, which was expressed as the log of the real gross domestic product per capita, that did not differentiate between males and females. And in reality, we know that the per capita income of females is far less than that of males in all countries. And because there were no reliable comparable gender specific estimates of adult literacy for many countries, that continued to be the case. But despite these constraints, it was interesting to compare the two gender specific HTIs constructed on the basis of existing and estimated data in 1990, because that led to two major conclusions. One of the first being that countries move up the HTI scale. As countries move up the HTI scale, there was a clear overall tendency for the female index to approach and finally overtake the male index. In other words, as the Human Development Index showed an improvement in different countries, the female indices started showing better performance than the male counterparts. And this was primarily the effect of the lower female adult literacy levels, which was dampened down by the effect of higher female life expectancy level. And this is what I would like to draw your attention to in this slide, that in general, the female life expectancy levels are much higher than that of males. Women live longer than men do, and there's a lot of discussion with regard to this fact, this indicator of female life expectancy, whether it is in the developing countries or the developed countries of the world. Biologically, women live longer than men. There are not, as I said, there is a lot of economic and scientific discussions surrounding this fact. For example, if we look at some of Amartya Sen's writings, he has even gone to the extent of estimating the number of missing women, going by this trend that women live longer than men. He has estimated the number of missing women in South Asia who never got a chance to survive beyond their first year or beyond birth. At birth, it is said that boys outnumber girls everywhere in the world. There are about 105 or 106 male child that are born for every one girl child. But after conception, biology, it seems, favors women on the whole than men do. And considerable research has shown that if men and women receive similar nutrition and medical attention and general health care, women tend to live noticeably longer than men. So women on the whole seem more resistant to diseases and are hardier than men. So when given the same care as males, female will tend to have better survival rates. So in this context, what Sen did was to estimate the number of missing women in countries, say India, China, and also in countries such as North African countries or West Asia and so on. And he estimated that given the ratios of men and women survival rates, he estimated that there are about 100 million missing women in the world who we are now talking about. And that also shows the levels of inequality, terrible levels of inequality that exist, where women face mortality conditions even where naturally they should not be facing mortality conditions, because science expects otherwise, that women should live longer than that of men. So that is the first conclusion that can be drawn from the calculations of HTI that was done for men and women separately in 1990. So even though there were data limitations, female life expectancy estimate actually pulled the female HTI levels up, even if the adult literacy ratios showed very low levels of achievement for women. The second conclusion was that among countries with very similar HTIs, there was enormous variation in the female-male disparity, particularly among countries belonging to the low and medium HTI groups. So lower the HTI levels of countries, or lower the HTI ranks of countries in the overall ranking of countries, the male-female disparity was seen to be much higher. So as HTI levels improve, or the rankings of countries improve based upon the Human Development Index, the female-male disparity also tends to lower down. So it is desirable that there are sufficient investments made on different dimensions of human development, such that both men and women are empowered and we move towards a more equitable form of society. So given this background, one of the examples that we find quoted in the 1990 technical notes of human development indices is that if we compare Tanzania, Pakistan and India, which were next to each other in their low HDI ranks, 35, 36 and 37, but their female-male disparities were very different. So female HDI as a percentage of male HDI ranged from 96 in Tanzania to 83 in Pakistan to 77 in India. So while India was ranked better in terms of HDI than Tanzania and Pakistan, if you note the female HDI as a percentage of male HDI was much better in Tanzania and Pakistan than it was in India, and that could be attributed more to the indicator of life expectancy and the adult literacy rates. So that brings us to this discussion on the Gender Development Index. Though the GDI or the Gender Development Index was introduced in 1995, the discussion here in this class pertains to the latest calculations that were done based upon the HDR report of 2016. So as I've already said, the HDR has been largely concerned with inequalities in the opportunities and predicaments of women and men. Women have lesser opportunities than men. Women face more vulnerabilities than men, and but they share many aspects of living together. They collaborate with each other in complex and ubiquitous ways. However, they often end up with very different rewards and deprivations, and therefore women's achievements or women's deprivations are one of the important indicators of how badly a country is doing or how good a country is doing. So there is a need for fresh economic and social analysis as well as careful and probing empirical research on the achievements and deprivations of women vis-a-vis that of men. So GDI was specifically concerned with developing a framework for gender equity sensitive indicators of achievements and freedoms. So what does the GDI measure? If you look at the slide here, it gives you the map of what the Gender Development Index measures. It measures the gender gaps in human development achievements by accounting for disparities between women and men in three basic dimensions of human development, the same as that of the HDI, health, knowledge and living standards. And in the report of 2016, the UNDP's endeavor was to use the most recent, reliable and internally consistent data. So they collected more extensive and more reliable gender disaggregated data as a challenge that the international community should squarely face, and they continued to publish results on the GDI estimates in the expectation that it will help increase the demand for such data. And there are possibilities that there will be more demands for strengthening the need for such data because of policy considerations. So as I was saying, the GDI uses the same variables as the HDI. The difference is that the GDI adjusts the average achievement of each country in life expectancy, education attainments and income in accordance with the disparity in achievement between women and men. So if you look at the dimensions here, the dimensions are the same. Long and healthy life, which can be which is equivalent to longevity or the duration that women and men live. Knowledge, the education dimension, and income or the standard of living dimension. Similar, the same dimensions for men. Indicators, the indicator for life for long and healthy life being life expectancy. For knowledge, expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling, and for standard of living, the GNI, per capita and purchasing power dollars. And then the next step is of course to construct the dimension index, the life expectancy index, education index and the GNI index. And similarly, dimension indices are constructed for the male counterparts. So accordingly, we have the HDI for females and the HDI for males, the female human development index and the male human development index. And then the GDI is calculated by looking at what is the HDI of females compared to that of the males. Let us look at this with the formula that is used for GDI construction based on the 2016 technical report and an illustration followed by that. So these are the sources of the gender development data. The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs that churns out a lot of economic and social statistics on important indicators such as life expectancy at birth. That's the source for life expectancy at birth, and this source of data is kept the same over the years for consistency in comparison of countries across time. expected years of schooling data is collected from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, and then there are various surveys carried out by the UNICEF. Under the aegis of the UNICEF, there are various demographic and health surveys which are carried out, and those data are relied upon for getting data on expected years of schooling. The data on mean years of schooling are very meticulously calculated by Barrow and Lee, which is also available on their website barrowlee.com, and also the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the UNICEF surveys. And the estimated earned income is calculated by the Human Development Report Office, which estimates that provides estimates based on female and male shares of the economically active population. For those students who are interested in looking at the details of these data, how they are collected, to gather information over a period of time and use it for their own research purpose or dissertation purposes, I would urge you to look up these websites that I have listed out here. For those working on education data, one of the most reliable is to visit this website barrowlee.com, that will give data country wise and over a period of time, very meticulously done data which can be used for research purposes. So these are the sources of gender development data which are used by the HDR of 2016 for calculation of the Gender Development Index. As like the HDI, goalposts are fixed for the Gender Development Index as well. So there is a minimum level of achievement and there is a maximum level of achievement based upon the countries that have been taken for GDI and HDI rankings in that report. So in the 2016 report, these are the goalposts that were reported for expected years of schooling 0 and 18, mean years of schooling 0 and 15, estimated earned income 175,000 USD, life expectancy at birth for females 22.5 and 87.5, for males 17.5 and 82.5. And in the context of life expectancy at birth for male and female population that I just discussed, note the goalposts for male and female life expectancies. The goalposts are relatively higher for females than males. So in the minimum, females live on an average 5 years more than that of males, and in the maximum also the number of years by which the female population is supposed to live longer than male is just about 5 years. So these are the goalposts based on which the index is calculated. Now let us have a look at the steps for calculation of the Gender Development Index. The first step is to estimate the female and male earned incomes, and to be able to calculate the estimated earned incomes, the share of the wage bill is calculated for each gender. The female share of wage bill is first calculated, which is given by SF here. The share of wage bill is nothing but what is the total amount of wages that accrue to the female population when we take the entire economically active male and female population into account. So the female share of the wage bill is given by this formula, which is WF by WM into EAF divided by WF by WF into EAF plus EAM. Here SF is the female share of wage bill. WF by WM is the ratio of female to male wage. EAF is the female share of the economically active population, and EAM here is the male share of the economically active population, and the male share of the wage bill is calculated as 1 minus SF. So we first calculate the female share of the economically active population, female wage share of the wage bill, and based upon the female wage share we calculate the male wage share. So that's the first step. And then we also calculate the estimated female earned income per capita. So note that this is GNI per capita, but only for females. So this is the estimated female earned income per capita. So far till 1995, the GNI estimates were gender neutral. So it was only a single estimate without making allowances for what is the share of the female economically active population in the total wage bill. So the first time in terms of measurements we are moving towards the GNI per capita in terms of female, or what is the female share in the total wage bill of the entire population. This is one of its kind. So it is obtained from GNI per capita first by multiplying it by the female share of wage bill SF, and then rescaling it by the female share of population. So, the GNI per capita for females is GNI per capita into SF by PF. SF here basically refers to the female share of the wage bill, and PF refers to the female share of the total population. So, if you look here, PF is given by the female share of the population divided by the total population. So, GNI per capita for females is calculated as GNI per capita total multiplied by the female share of wage bill divided by the female share of the population. Similarly, the estimated male earned income per capita is given by GNI PC into SM by PM, where SM is the male share of the wage bill and PM is the male share of the total population. And in step 2, based upon the similar range equalization method as followed for construction of the Human Development Index, and because we have already defined the minimum and the maximum values, the sub-indices are calculated based upon this range equalization method, actual value minus the minimum divided by maximum minus minimum, and the dimension index is calculated for each of the dimensions: education, health and income. Okay, so the GDI in the final step is calculated, which is HDI for females upon HDI for males, and the calculation for HDI females and males is nothing but the geometric mean calculation. This is the dimension index health, dimension index education, I health, I ED or education, and then I income for females. So, first the HDI for females is calculated, which is the geometric mean of the 3 dimension indices, and similarly the HDI males is calculated, geometric mean of the 3 dimension indices, and in the final calculation GDI is HDIF by HDIM. So, this is an illustration here for Malawi. This illustration is taken from the technical report of the HDR 2016. For those who are very new to this discussion on human development indices and the human development concept itself, I would urge you to look up the United Nations Development Programme Human Development Report websites, which I have mentioned here in this slide, hdr.undp.org. This website is a rich repository of resources on the human development indices and human development reports. And those of you who are interested, although as a part of this course, I am not introducing worksheets on human development calculations. However, for those of you who are interested in taking up research in these areas, are strictly requested to take up some of these reports and collect the data from these reports and work out all of these formulas based upon the data of various countries on Excel sheets, and that will help you come up with ideas on human development research. This is an illustration for Malawi. Every HDR comes up with technical reports or technical notes in each of its reports. I urge all of you to look up the technical notes of each of the human development report, which is also a very rich repository of the significance of carrying out these calculations, the significance of taking up different formulas for HDI calculations, which can go a long way in strengthening your understanding about human development issues. So, for the life expectancy indicator, the female and male values are given as such: expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling. The wage ratio has been calculated based upon the formula that I just discussed, which is the wage ratio of female to male. Then the share of female and male population, share of economically active population for Malawi has been given in the form of a table here. And then the first step is to calculate the female wage bill. If you look here, the wage ratio is given by 0.8. So, SF is 0.8 into female share of population, which if you see here is 0.509. So, 0.509 is the female share of economically active population, divided by 0.8 into 0.509 plus 0.491, which is the male share of population, and that gives us the female wage bill, which is 0.534. Similarly, the GNI per capita for females has been calculated, which gives us the value 971.7. The male wage bill or SM 0.5466, and then GNI per capita for males, which is 1175.2. if you note here, the GNI per capita for females is substantially lower than that of GNI per capita for males. So what does this mean? This means that if as a share of the total per capita incomes, lesser incomes are accruing to females, or females are in lesser lesser ownership of income resources compared to their male counterparts, then that means their spending on female levels of human development are also, while not necessarily, but may be much lower than that of their male counterparts. So the levels of human development achievements will also be lower. Similarly, the health indices are calculated. In this case here, if you look at the values again, life expectancy at birth 64.8 minus the minimum 22.5. So actual minus minimum divided by maximum minus minimum. This is the female health index. This is the male health index, female education index, male education index, and the estimated female earned income index, which is the log transformation of the incomes that have been taken, that comes to 0.3435 for females and 0.3722 for males. So based upon all of these arithmetic that we have just done, the female HTI is calculated, which is the geometric mean of all of these indices, the dimension indices, the male HTI and the GDI given by the female HTI upon male HTI, which is 0.921, and the gender development index actually for Malawi shows up to be much higher than what the human development index itself came up to be in 2016. And then once the gender development index has been calculated based upon the methods that we have just discussed, a grouping of countries is made based on GDI. And there are 5 groupings that are followed based upon the latest report of HTR. So it also makes sense to look at how these groupings are translated and what is the implications of grouping the countries as such. So the GDI groups are based on the absolute deviation of GDI from gender parity, 100. So GDI minus 1. So countries with absolute deviation from gender parity of 2.5% or less are considered to be countries with high equality in HTI achievements between women and men. So that's group 1. Group 1 are the high HTI countries, high HTI achievements in among both women and men, and there is more gender parity among them. So the gender absolute deviation from gender parity of 2.5% or less. Countries with absolute deviation of 2.5 to 5% are considered as medium high equality in HTI achievement. So they are group 2, 5 to 7.5% group 3, 7.5 to 10% group 4, and deviation from gender parity of more than 10% are countries with low equality in HTI achievements between women and men. It is very interesting to look at which are those countries that falls into each of these group classifications. And in the context of the global north, global south debate that we were discussing in the beginning of this course, if it will really make a lot of sense to look to know that the global south is generally in the lower groups 3, 4 and 5, and the global north is found to be in groups 1 and 2. And you would see that although income, as I have already said, does not have a straightforward relationship with human development achievements, still we do see that a lot of countries in the global south are found to be in the lowest, are seen to have more gender disparity than the global north. In terms of some examples, Norway is in group 1. This is based upon the value of 2015. Note the value of GDI and the value of HTI here. In Switzerland in group 2, Indonesia in 3, Malawi in 4, and India in group 5, which has a lot of gender disparity in terms of human development achievements among men and women. Now, apart from the gender development index, there is another measure which was introduced in the report of 1995, and that was referred to as the gender empowerment measure, and this is much different from the gender development index, and a little discussion on what is the gender empowerment measure, what are the implications of gender empowerment measure. Although the calculation of gender empowerment measure discontinued since 2000 because of also the coming in of inequality adjusted gender development indices and so on, it makes sense to look at what were the main characteristic features of the gender empowerment measure. If you look at the gender empowerment measure slide that is showing on your screen now, you would see that the dimensions are much different from what we have done in the case of the Human Development Index or the GDI. You could say that in developing countries, as women are subject to various forms of inequality, they are caught in some kind of an inequality trap, and this gender inequality being undesirable needs to be very closely watched, and this requires empowerment of women, and therefore there is a need to look up or measure the extent of gender empowerment or the degree of gender empowerment based upon certain dimensions. Now, this was the first time that gender empowerment was being measured, and of course there are various criticisms of this measure, which there are various political scientists and other social scientists that go a long way in and rightly so in criticizing that the gender empowerment cannot be so easily measured based upon a few indicators. However, given the fact that there is limitations of data, even if we put together some important data to be able to tell us what is the participation of or what is the share of participation of men and women in economic and political decision making, even then we can go a long way in terms of policy making. So even so, while in terms of academic orientation there is a lot of criticism and debate with regard to the gender empowerment measure, in terms of actual policy making, gender empowerment measure is very important because it helps us to give us some numbers with respect to how men and women are performing differently based upon certain select dimensions. So the dimensions that have been taken for the gender empowerment measure are: first is political participation in decision making, then second is economic participation in decision making, and third is power over economic resources. The indicators that have been considered are as follows. The first is for the dimension political participation, female and male shares of parliamentary seats. For economic dimension, female and male shares of positions as legislators, senior officials and managers, female and male shares of professional and technical positions, and for power over economic resources, female and male estimated earned income. Now, the first two variables are chosen to reflect economic participation and decision making power, women's and men's percentage shares of administrative and managerial positions, and their percentage shares of professional and technical categories. These are broad, loosely defined occupational categories. Because the relevant population for each is different, we calculate a separate index for each and then we add the two together. This is for economic participation and decision making. The third variable, women's and men's percentage shares of parliamentary seats, is chosen to reflect, or rather the first variable, the women's and men's percentage shares of parliamentary seats, is chosen to reflect political participation and decision making. And for all of these variables, the methodology that is used is a population weighted averaging to derive what is called an equally distributed equivalent percentage, or the EDEP percentage, and each variable is indexed by dividing the EDEP by 50%, and it is chosen to be 50% so as to represent equal weightage being given to both men and women. An income variable is used to reflect the third variable, power over economic resources, is basically an income variable here, EDEP for income. So, an income variable is used to reflect power over economic resources, and it is calculated in the same way as for the GDI, except that unadjusted rather than adjusted GDP per capita is used. And these three indices are then added together to derive the final GEM value. Unlike that in the case of GDI and HDI, where we were averaging out the dimension indices for calculation of an index, here if you note here, this is not an index but a measure. So we are trying to see what is the level of empowerment that has been received by females vis-a-vis the males. So in this case here, we simply add up all of these EDEP to come up with a gender empowerment measure, unlike the in the case of indices in the previous cases. So these are some of the things that I have just discussed. Focusing on women's opportunities rather than their capabilities is what GEM captures. It captures gender inequality in the three key areas of political participation, economic participation, and power over economic resources. And for each of these dimensions, an equally distributed equivalent percentage is calculated as a population weighted average. This is the formula that is used to calculate the EDEP, the equally distributed equivalent percentage, and the EDEP values are then added up to come up with the gender empowerment measure. So here let us look at a small illustration based upon the data for Russian Federation. So we have first calculated the EDEP for parliamentary representation. It measures the relative empowerment of women in terms of their political participation. In terms of population share, females 0.536, males 0.46. Parliamentary share, if you look, is only 8% compared to male 92%. And based upon this data, the EDEP for parliamentary representation comes out to be 13.88. So this initial EDEP is then indexed an ideal value of 50%. So 13.88 divided by 50, which is 0.278. So Russian Federation, the first variable, parliamentary representation. In other words, we are looking at political participation of women compared to men. The share of population, the female share is much higher in population, if you see 0.53 compared to 0.46, whereas parliamentary share is only 8% and in the case of males 92%. EDEP 13.8%, which is an indexed an ideal value of 50% to 0.278. So this is the value that we are finally concerned with for parliamentary representation. Then we calculate the EDEP for economic participation in similar ways. So if you look at the economic participation, which loosely is put together in terms of occupational categories, population share 0.536, 0.46, percentage share of positions as legislators, senior officials and managers 39%, 61%, percentage share of professional and technical positions 65%, 35%. So the EDEP is calculated for each of these and then indexed to the value of 50%, which comes out to 0.933, and this is EDEP for legislators, senior officials and managers 0.937, and then a simple averaging out is done for EDEP for economic participation because you have so many indicators here. So that comes out to 0.935. Okay, and then the final, the income dimension, female and male share. This is the estimated earned income in terms of purchasing power parity, 8,476 females, males 13,581. Income index based upon the range equalization method, actual minus minimum divided by maximum minus minimum. This data is taken from pre-2016, which is why you see the difference in maximum income, which was 40,000 for a large part of the 2000s. So the income index 0.210, income index for males 0.338, and then the EDEP is calculated as 0.255. And then we calculate the GEM as a simple average of all the three EDEP indices, which comes out to 0.489. So this is how the gender empowerment measure is estimated. And one of, as I've just discussed, in respect activities of women's organizations and other forms of agencies that promote, say, female labor force literacy, female literacy, demographic change, etc., are of crucial importance for the empowerment of women is concerned. And therefore a lot of interventions need to take place at the grassroots level to ensure that women's empowerment has taken place. However, the HDR made an attempt towards measuring the GEM in terms of providing appropriate policy attention towards women's issues at the grassroots level. Now let us move on to the rest of the indices. In the last class, I introduced you to the Human Poverty Index and the Human Poverty Index has two variants, one for the developing countries and one for the developed countries. HPI 1 was constructed for the developing countries, which is showing on your screen now. Dimensions are just the same. The indicators worked out for HPI 1 and HPI 2 are different than in the case of the other HDI indices. For HPI 1, the indicator is we are basically measuring deprivation here. That is one of the important things to remember in the case of the Human Poverty Index. Compared to the Gender Development Index or the HDI or the GEM, they are all achievement indicators. They are all measuring achievement indicators for the dimensions that have been considered after a lot of thought and deliberation. But the HPI indices, the Human Poverty indices, are measuring deprivation here. So the indicators here are probability at birth of not surviving till age 40, adult illiteracy rate, and percentage of people not using an improved water source, percentage of children underweight for age, and then a deprivation in a decent standard of living, based upon which the Human Poverty Index for developing countries is calculated. Since we by now are very comfortable with the or I would like to assume so that we are at least comfortable with understanding the different dimensions and indicators here, we can just move on to an illustration of the HPI 1. So the illustration here that I have considered is that of Bolivia, and if you look at the indicators here, the percentage of population not using an improved water source is 15%, percentage of children underweight 8%. An unweighted average is taken of this indicator here. This indicator belongs to the dimension of a decent standard of living. So, and then the HPI 1 is calculated using the following formula, where, and these are the three indicators here, P1, P2, P3. P3 has two indicators, which is calculated by an unweighted average of the two indicators. P1 here is the probability at birth of not surviving till age 40. P2 is adult illiteracy rate. I'm sorry, there is a mistake here. This is adult illiteracy rate. P3 is the unweighted average of population not using an improved water source and children underweight for age. So based upon this, the HPI 1 is calculated as 13.6. Similarly, HPI 2 is calculated for constructed for the developed countries, and for select OECD countries. This is taken from the 2009 report. There is an addition of dimension as far as the HPI 2 is concerned, and along with long and healthy life, knowledge and a decent standard of living, there is social exclusion which has been added to HPI 2 calculation. So this basically relates to non-participation or exclusion of population from the overall levels of human development. It is represented by those that have been unemployed for a very long period of time, particularly for 12 months or so. And since employment is one of the important indicators of development for the OECD countries, therefore it shows up as an important indicator here. The similar method is followed for the calculation of the HPI, but let us have a brief look at what do these indicators mean here. So in the case of developed countries or HPI 2, vulnerability, long and healthy life is defined as vulnerability to death at a relatively early age as measured by the probability at birth of not surviving till age 60. In the case of HPI 1, it was 40, and for HPI 2, it's 60. Knowledge, it shows deprivation occurs when there is exclusion from the world of reading and communications as measured by percentage of adults lacking functional literacy skills. Deprivation in terms of decent standard of living, all those people who are below the poverty line of 50% of the median adjusted household disposable income in the case of developed countries. And social exclusion, as I just mentioned, measured in terms of rate of long-term unemployment. And then the similar formula is used for calculation of HPI 2. This illustration here shows the calculation for Canada, which is a developed country, and then the HPI 2 shows a value of 10.9. So that concludes most of the indices that have been considered as part of the Human Development Index calculation. In the recent times, some new indices have also come up, such as the Multidimensional Poverty Index. In the next class, we will look at the multidimensional poverty index. We will spend at least 10 minutes on the multidimensional poverty index, because in the recent times a lot of comparisons, cross country comparisons have taken place based upon the multidimensional poverty index, or the MPI, so much so that the MPI has come to replace the HTI on many counts, because it shows what are the different what is the multidimensionality of poverty or vulnerability of people in both the developed and the developing countries. So while while many countries may not be income poor, may have made substantial achievements in terms of human development indices, there may still be various other indicators based upon the same dimensions of human development which are not getting accounted for in the human development index, and that can be estimated based upon the multidimensional poverty index. So much so that there are various initiatives such as the Oxford Poverty Human Development Initiative, which has calculated MPI over a period of time. So in the next class, we will conclude the indices discussion by looking at the multidimensional poverty index, and along with that we will also look at two additional indices which accounts for inequality while constructing the development index, and within that we will look at the gender inequality index and the inequality adjusted human development index. So I will see you in the next class. Thank you.